And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Acting Secretary for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Adrianne Todman. Throughout her distinguished career, Acting Secretary Todman has demonstrated her belief in the importance of confronting housing insecurity and eliminating housing discrimination. Her career in public service began in the office of then Congressman Ron DeLugo, a long-serving member representing the U.S. Virgin Islands, where Acting Secretary Todman was born and raised. She later served as the executive director of the District of Columbia Housing Authority, where she implemented an award-winning model to house veterans experiencing homelessness and increased home ownership opportunities by 50% for low and moderate income families. From 2017 to June 2021, she served as the CEO of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. In that role, she advocated for funding and policies to preserve and develop affordable housing and help communities thrive. In June of 2021, she was confirmed by the Senate to serve as the Deputy Secretary of HUD, where she led critical priorities, including increasing the housing supply, improving disaster response and recovery efforts, and steering climate and resiliency initiatives. In March of this year, she was elevated to serve as the Acting Secretary of HUD. We are so honored that she prioritized time to be with fair housing leaders from throughout this nation. We will first hear brief remarks from Acting Secretary Todman. Following her remarks, she will be joined on the stage by NFHA's President and CEO, Lisa Rice, for a fireside chat. Please give Secretary Todman a warm NFHA welcome.
We had a walk-on song and everything. Good morning, everyone. It is Monday, and we are here together, and that is a blessing. It is always an honor to be amongst people who are always fighting to do the right thing for Americans across this country. And I want to thank the board chair for that wonderful introduction and his leadership. And I want to thank my sister Lisa, who is backstage, for her extraordinary leadership in this town. Let me tell you something, when Lisa calls, people listen. Everybody. And so you have in her not just a fabulous leader, but somebody who is a mover and shaker here in a town with lots of movers and shakers. She stands heads and shoulders. Let's hear it for Lisa. I want to begin very quickly and just reiterate what our president said to us this weekend, that there is no place for political violence in this country. I'll add to that, there is no place for violence in our neighborhoods, in our communities, across our country. We have to do better. We have to be better. And it starts with each one of us. You know, a couple weeks ago, the department acknowledged the 90th anniversary of the Federal Home Administration, FHA, which I know that acronym is something all of you are very familiar with. And when I was addressing the staff on a special celebration that was pulled together that included many of the former FHA commissioners, including our current FHA commissioner, Julia Gordon, who's wonderful to work with, I said to them, who do we want to be for the next 90 years of FHA? We knew what we were. Year one, year two, wasn't pretty, right? For any of you who know your housing history, you know that FHA and some of the things that it did created some of the gaps in generational wealth, or just wealth, across this country with things that were very intentionally done in terms of keeping Black and brown people in only certain neighborhoods. That was the early history of FHA. So I challenged the current HUD team and really everybody in the room, like, who do we want to be for the next 90 years? What do we want this country to look like for the next 90 years? And I know I don't have to tell this august group, because your true north is one that is foundational in terms of equity and the rights that everybody needs to have, particularly those who've had rights taken from them. You know, I'm very proud to work with a team, with an administration that has centered equity from day one. Day one, President Biden issued an executive order creating the true north for all of us on what was important to this administration. And you can see the outcomes of that executive order, that value setting, throughout much of the work that we do at HUD and other agencies do as well. We have a vice president who has been going across the country talking about access to economic opportunity. I've been there with her. I see how important it is for her to not just understand the values of the administration, but that people are connected to the things that they should have access to, resources. She turned to me and she said, we've got to do better making sure the things we're doing in DC that regular folk know. All the housing counseling that we do, that people who want to buy a home don't even know that they have access to that. And she fights every day for that. We have, thankfully, and with the help of all of you, done the hard work of beginning to reduce the black and white homeownership gap over the past several years. And I applaud you for that as well. We're building more affordable housing. You know, I've been around HUD and its budget a couple decades now, my gray hair will attest to. And you've not always seen an administration that puts on the table what its values are by saying we have to eliminate homeownership among everybody, but particularly veterans. We have to make sure we're helping seniors. Our boomers are booming, right? We got too many grandmothers and grandfathers on the street. Who do we want to be in the next 90 years? We want to make sure that our babies who are aging out of foster care, who need a net more than any time in their lives so they don't fall into a cycle of poverty, remain in a cycle of poverty. It is our president and vice president said when they need our help, we will make sure they have the rental assistance they need so they have at least some place to live as they are adulting. We're doing things like modernizing our physical disability rule. We're making sure that people across the country know that you should not be discriminated against because of your religion or who you love. To empower folks so that they know what their rights are and go after folks who are not doing the right thing. That's one of the reasons why I'm very proud to announce a significant step today in fighting for discrimination and removing barriers. One of the things that this administration did, many of you know, is that it charged two bad sisters, Susan Rice and Marcia Fudge. First of all, let's hear it for Marcia Fudge. It was extraordinary working with her while she served us, and when Sister said she had to retire, she wanted to retire. You understand what that feels like. These things are not easy. But he charged Ambassador Rice and Secretary Fudge with co-chairing our appraisal bias task force. And there's a lot of work that's been done, and I recognize there's still a lot of work to do, but today I'm proud to announce that HUD is charging multiple entities with housing discrimination for issuing a biased appraisal and then denying a loan application in Denver, Colorado. And we're going to ensure that people are protected. A lot of folks didn't know what appraisal bias was until a couple of years ago. They just thought this is what happens. Well, you take down your family pictures, you move your books away. That's just normal. It's not normal. Who do we want to be in the next 90 years? I'm also pleased, and I know that some of you are aware, that we also reached a agreement with the Appraisal Foundation. I understand for some of you, it probably didn't go far enough, but we're proud that we were able to create a path to diversify an industry that is less than 1% of people of color. Think about that for a second. Less than 1% of people of color. And because of the way people are being hired, they're hired by not what you knew, but who you knew. So we've created an agreement with them to make sure that that industry looks like this room, looks like America. You know, I'm going to sit down with Sister CEO Lisa to talk more about some of the things that we're doing, not just at HUD and across the administration, but let me say this. You know, these are troubling times right now. Right? I know from time to time, particularly many of you here, you're fighting every day, you're pushing that boulder up the hill, you're trying to do the right thing, and then something happens and you take that step back and you feel, what is it all for? Why am I even trying? Who am I helping? I'm here not only to share thoughts on behalf of the whole HUD team, but to say to all of you, not only am I grateful for the work that you are doing, that don't give up hope. Keep in mind that we have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who are coming behind us that need the fortitude that our parents and grandparents in the 50s and the 60s gave us so that we could do this work today. We have an obligation to keep fighting. It's important to the destiny of this country that we succeed. Thank you all for what you do every single day. Oh, she snuck up behind me. Where do you want me to go?
Sit right in the
Okay, I'll follow you. Where do you want
go.
me? Right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right there.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Secretary Todman, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy that you could be here with us today. When you and Secretary Fudge took over at the helm of HUD, you took over an agency that largely had been gutted and greatly disinvested. The amount of funding that had been included in the federal budget for HUD had continually diminished year after year. A lot of the senior staff, a lot of very experienced staff had left, and we all know what happens when people who are highly skilled leave an organization. So you guys have had to rebuild HUD. You sort of had to dual track things because you just couldn't come in and rebuild. You had to also advance an agenda.
That's right.
Can you talk to us a little bit, because many of the people in this audience went to the Hill 2, 3, 4 times a year, beseeching Congress to increase HUD's budget, to allow for the number of FTEs, full-time employees at HUD, to increase. So tell us a little bit about how that rebuilding effort is going and whether or not you think more rebuilding still needs to be done.
You know, thank you for that. And thank you all for the work that you're doing to ensure that HUD has the resources that we need. Your voices go much further than mine and our team. So you are so right. You know, one of the things about being the acting secretary now is that I was the deputy. Hey, Demetria, I just saw you, girl. Hey, how you doing? Let's hear it for Demetria.
We got to clone Demetria because we still need her at HUD. We got scientists out there working. Our responsible AI team is working on her right now.
I call her Demetria the traitor. She loves that. I still love her. That loves my heart for you, girl. Speaking of which, is Diane here? Diane Shelley? Did she make it here? Okay, we'll is she here? She's not. Okay, very good. Anyway, back to 2021. So part of being the acting secretary is that I was the deputy. And when you're the deputy, you go deep into what's happening in the budget. And our budget was ugly. And to get to budgets represent values, when I sat down with the career senior staff at HUD for our first, we have these little budget hearings for the first budget hearing in 2021 as the deputy, they were elated that they had a deputy that cared to listen to what they had to say. And I hate to put folks on blast, but that's the truth. They were like, somebody actually wants to go through how many positions we need. Somebody wants to hear how much more funding we need in the FIP program, which I'm proud to say I looked at the numbers before I got here, that the FIP budget has increased by about 20% from 2020 to today. And I thank you all for that as well. That's represents the hard work of all of us, but particularly you all. You know, they were really sort of resolved that this is it. And so when they came in and we took their ideas, and, you know, everybody doesn't get what they want. I mean, Demetria was active for all sorts of stuff. I said, you can't get all that, Demetria. Come on, girl. You're going to take stuff from public housing, you know? I'm just kidding. But we were able to increase the FHO staff. I saw that. Able to increase the FTEs in FHO by about 8%. And it's not everything we need, but it's certainly going in the right direction, given what was happening when we walked in the door. So I thank you all for helping us with those accomplishments, but we know we need to do more. I will say, in terms of where we are with HUD, we were at a historic low in terms of FTEs. When this is my second tour at HUD. I was there in the 90s as a career staffer. And then there was about 11,000 employees at HUD here in the DMV and in our local offices. When I walked in the door, we were about 7,200. And now we're about 8,400. So we are moving in the right direction. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I am concerned about any backsliding in terms of support of our department. Some of that already has begun on the Hill last year. So I need you all to continue to voice the needs of people across this country.
And the needs are severe.
Absolutely.
The needs are severe. You talked about the growing level of homelessness. I'm going to talk about the increase in the number of fair housing complaints that have been filed in the nation. But I do wonder, given all of this, what do you see as your major priorities?
Well, you know, we've got to get money out the door. You know, we have a number of new programs. We got pro housing out, and I hope that people were paying attention to that and what the possibilities in terms of building places, particularly in neighborhoods where people don't want housing to be built, affordable housing. We got to get our rules across. You know, we're doing really historic things in our rulemaking. We want to make sure we're getting that work done. And then we want to make sure that, one personal thing I'm doing is making sure that we have steadied the ship for our career team. You know, the career team, and I say this probably, I used to be a career staffer, so there's love in my heart, but the career team is the glue and the real superheroes of any particular department. And we gathered last week with all the senior leadership at HUD just to talk about what our shared responsibilities are over the next 4.5 years, and just to level set a little bit. So, you know, getting money out the door, getting our rules across the finish line, working with this administration and other members of the cabinet to make sure we're leaning in every way we can with the authorities we have. And there's some exciting announcements that'll come later this week with the president.
All right. Well, we are excited to hear those announcements. One of the things that we know has been a priority, and you touched on this in your comments, is the PAVE task force and addressing appraisal bias. Now, there has been a lot that has been achieved, but there's more that needs to be done. Do you think that you're going to be able to achieve those within the next 6 months to a year?
Right. So we're proud that we're able to move the needle on these appraisal bias cases. I know it's something that you were, when I say that this list of calls, she was like, Adrianne, come on, what do y'all do with these cases? So glad we're able to get something across the line there, pleased that we're able to have this settlement with the Appraisal Foundation. And I can't help but continue to acknowledge the leadership of Demetria in helping with that agreement and getting us to this point. But you know what? I had a great briefing with Melody and others inside the building to understand, we had 21 tasks. Mm-hmm. Where are we with that, and where do we need to be? So we know we have more work to do. know that you have in me and in NARA the leadership to make sure we're continuing to push so that we're doing everything we can on appraisal bias. I think that now that we have opened up this Pandora's box of enlightenment of what it means for generational wealth, empowering families to know that this is not okay, it is not normal to hide your grandparents' pictures, that we're now going to lean in more to see what can we do that is aspirational but also practical in its impact.
And when you say NARA, yes, thank you. When you say NARA, you're referencing NARA Tangent, who is the new head of Domestic Policy Council.
That's right.
Replacing Susan Rice.
That is correct.
So it's you and NARA going forward that are leading the rest of the implementation.
That is correct.
Of the PAVE Action Plan.
Right. And I would say we have a great leader as well with Sandra Thompson at NFHA, who's been using the power of her agency to help lean into the GSCs, but also using data to inform the direction that we need to go.
Yeah, and that data has been powerful. Yes. We're so pleased. So any role that HUD played in helping to get that data released, we really appreciate that because the appraisal data is so important. Last week, the National Fair Housing Alliance released our 2024 Fair Housing Trends Report. Okay. We do this report every year. Shout out to all of our members out there who submitted your data. Are
there some that didn't submit their data?
There are. Six. But even with that, we still showed another increase in the number of fair housing complaints filed. So this will be the third year in a row in which we've seen a record number of fair housing complaints filed. So in 2023, it was the largest number of fair housing complaints ever filed in our nation's history. What that means is we need more resources to tackle those fair housing complaints. And we recognize that many of the complaints are more complex.
Right.
They're not your just garden variety types of discrimination complaints. We saw an increase in the number of harassment complaints. Now, this is people being harassed at the place where they live, at the place where they are domiciled. The number of harassment complaints based on color increased by 471%. The number of harassment complaints based on race increased by over 119%, I think.
Okay.
Those harassment complaints are extremely difficult to investigate because oftentimes you're talking about potential violence or violence has occurred. So what do you see in terms of HUD being able to help support the fair housing ecosystem to enable us, not only HUD, but also the private fair housing organizations to address these rising number of fair housing complaints?
Well, we certainly need more boots on the ground, right?
Yes.
We need to make sure that we have the people with the skills and the resources who are an army of folks that are able to take on this rise of cases. And those numbers are just crazy. That's often, we should be going to, like when I keep saying, who do we want to be in 90 years? We are going in the wrong direction. So we got to figure out how to right this ship. But certainly, additional resources, but also, I'm going to say the right fortitude and leadership, right? People's actions don't operate in a silo and in a vacuum. It sometimes represents what they think is okay. Because if you think you can get away with something, you're going to try to get away with it. So if there's a culture and leadership that is not focused on civility, that's not focused on making sure that we see ourselves as Americans in a country that needs to do better, then you're going to have more folk who think that they can roll up on someone and, be violent, discriminate, whether they're Black, whether they're Latino, whether they're disabled, whether they're Jewish or Christian, right? Some folks say, I'm just going to do it. Look at TikTok, they're doing it. Look at Twitter. Look at what's happening. It's going to be okay. If we don't have the right level of discourse at the top levels of this government that says that's not okay, and by the way, it's not helping you either. We are stronger as a country when everybody gets their potential to thrive. Absolutely everybody. There are geniuses in, as someone who worked in public housing, there are little geniuses that live in the hood that are not going to get a chance because no one wants to believe in them. I've seen them. Mm-hmm. I've sat with them and seen the brilliance. You know, I think about my own life, the life of my family, and I say, you know, part of my success, I didn't get here alone. My success is because my grandmother wanted to make sure that her family was taken care of. She didn't have a formal education. You know, she just made do, right? My mother, you know, didn't graduate from college. I'm the first in my immediate family to graduate from college.
First generation.
Yeah. So she, you know, she fought to make sure that me and my 3 brothers and sisters had an opportunity, right? And that's what our work is. That's what our collective work is that mothers and fathers and grandparents are able to be devoid of discrimination so they can do the things they need to do for their family, whether it be education, buying a home, helping them with the right job. That's what this is all about. That's what this is all about. And so if it means that HUD in its piece of this work needs more resources to make sure that more Lisas and Adrians exist decades from now, then that's what we absolutely need to be doing. And we're going to continue to do it.
So true. When you talk about your family history, reminds me of my family history. Both my mother and my father grew up in the Jim Crow South. Neither of them got beyond a 6th grade education because the schools for Black children only went up to the 6th grade. And they could not attend schools that were designed and created only for white children. So we have come a long way in this nation, but we have so much more work that we need to do. The racial wealth gap is growing. And in fact, our speakers coming up after you are going to talk about how much the racial wealth gap has grown since COVID, right? We're trending in the wrong direction in terms of people's ability to attain wealth and racial equity and wealth equity in this nation.
You know, one of the things people say, what keeps you up at night? Now, there's a lot of things that keep me up at night, but one of the things that definitely keeps me up at night is when I reference our boomers who are both booming and transitioning. There is a huge housing equity, a huge wealth equity transfer of wealth.
Yes.
That's going to happen from the boomers to the Gen Xers. And I'm thinking about, in the Gen Xers, how many Black and brown families are going to be able to take advantage of that transfer of wealth? And it's not enough.
It's not enough.
It's not enough.
It is not.
And so when I talk about who do we want to be in 90 years from now, we need to be in a position to make sure that our 20 and 30, maybe 40s, but our 20 and 30 somethings are able decades from now to have a transfer of wealth to their families, and so that we can right all the wrongs.
And indeed, and when we think about how much work needs to be done, we also think about the tools that we need in order to get that work done. One of the tools that this audience has been fighting for over 50 years has been the affirmatively furthering fair housing provision of the Fair Housing Act. When Ed Brooke and Walter Mondale crafted the law, they brilliantly crafted the law to include this affirmative component, which mandates that any entity, whoever you are, if you're a unit of government, if you are a corporation, if you are a federal agency, any entity that receives federal funds for a housing or community development purpose must implement and carry out all of its programs, not just its housing programs, its education programs, its health and human services programs, has to carry out all of its programs in a way that affirmatively furthers fair housing. The way that we talk about affirmatively furthering fair housing, Secretary Todman, is from the framework of where you live matters.
Right.
Where you live dictates too many outcomes in people's lives, because in the United States, because of segregation, place is inextricably linked to opportunity. And AFFH is our tool for being able to turn that around, right? To shift that dynamic. There is no secret to you. It's no secret to you that we were very unhappy that the administration had not released the AFFH rule by now. We know that the rule is still being worked on. What can you tell us about any projections for when the rule will be final, when it will be ready to be promulgated?
Right. Thanks for that. Let me say at the top that this administration believes in not just the aspirational value of AFFH, but the fact that to get there, we need to on the ground begin the work. So we value the rule, we value what the rule is intended to do. And that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we get it right. I don't have to remind this crowd of what happened not too long ago with this rule. I don't have to, because I think you all have that history. We're trying to make sure that we get it right so we don't repeat that history, and that we also are getting the right balance, because that rule, to your point, is one of the most extraordinary things ever written in the Fair Housing Act. Because it's not just about going after bad actors. It's about literally correcting the things that happen to Black folk and brown folk and other vulnerable and discriminated against decades ago. To think that it was a Republican president by way of Republican secretary by way of Secretary Romney, right, who became one of the heroes of this. Think about that.
Indeed.
Tells you that this is the right thing to do.
Indeed.
So we are working on this. My commitment is that this rule is going to happen. We're trying to make sure that we get it right.
Okay. Thank you for that. We appreciate that. One of the other rules that you all promulgated, didn't promulgate the rule, but it was guidance that were released, was around special purpose credit programs. We know that is an affirmative way.
That's right.
To advance racial equity in the United States. And though the proviso for special purpose credit programs rests with the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, all of the federal regulators were telling lenders, you can establish a special purpose credit program if you want to, but you'll be violating the Fair Housing Act if you do so. We reached out to you, we reached out to Secretary Fudge, and we said, we need this guidance and we need it sooner rather than later. And you all released the guidance in record time. We have a small sense of how that has benefited so many people, but I wonder if you would just talk about that for a moment and what you see as the true impact of the release of that guidance.
I think that I found that with many parts of the private sector, not every part, but many parts of it, if you give them a path, if you say to them, these are the terms of engagement, some of them will go down that path with you. And we saw that when we released the opinion, I think it was the end of 2021. And we have some of our banking industry colleagues that have created special programs to make sure that we're increasing Black home ownership. And I'm very, very proud of them. It's not enough. It's not enough. And here's my fear. My fear is that we are in an environment right now where we're seeing people, notwithstanding the protection of the opinion, we're seeing people step back from things that are supposed to create inclusivity, things that are supposed to create equity. We see it in the workplace. We see it in, some programs that have special loans for Black women are being told, you can't do that. So we're going to continue to work with our private sector partners to encourage them to go down the right path. And I suggest that you all do too, because my concern is that people in this recent environment, some of the cases that's come down, will be timid in even using the protection and the opinion that we gave them in 2021. So we're still working with our partners. We need more than the couple banks that are doing this. And look forward to your partnership and sort of pushing there as well.
Well, thank you. And we are indeed pushing. I don't know if you know this, but we partnered with the Mortgage Bankers Association to release the Special Purpose Credit Program Toolkit, which has been greatly accessed by thousands and thousands of people since the release of that guidance. In fact, Christy Furco, who at that time was, and you know Christy, she was the head of home lending for Wells Fargo, she actually said publicly that the reason Wells Fargo implemented their Special Purpose Credit Program was because of the HUD guidance.
Right.
And had it not been for the HUD guidance, Wells Fargo would have never released that program.
It makes a difference.
And the Wells Fargo's program is one of the few race-conscious programs, right? It's based on racial equity because Wells Fargo saw that Black homeowners were not able to refinance to the same degree that white homeowners were able to refinance when interest rates were at record lows. And so their special purpose credit program is designed so that you get the lower interest rate. So you essentially cut your mortgage payment in half. So we are so proud of that program and many other programs. We know
We're proud of it too.
Yeah, JP Morgan Chase was the first. So got to give credit to whom credit is due, right?
Absolutely.
While simultaneously holding, people's feet to the fire. Secretary Todman, thank you so much for being here.
Can I share one thing?
Please.
Just share one thing.
Please.
The other day, when I mentioned earlier, the obligation that we have to make sure that folks who are not in this room understand resources. I am deputizing all of you to make sure, because I know you have the knowledge. I know you're reading her stuff in her newsletter. I deputize all of you to make sure that everybody in your community, if you're at a cookout this summer and you want to talk about the mid cut, might use different words, but tell folks, you can, first time, if you have a cousin who wants to be a first-time homeowner and they don't know where to start, send them to HUD's website. Tell them there's housing counselors out there. If we want to be different in 90 years, in 100 years, it's going to take all of us doing not big things like this, but the micro moments that make a difference all the time. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for continuing to support HUD and its mission. And thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Please give a warm round of applause to our new HUD Secretary. And we look forward to working with you in the years to come.
There you go.
To advance fair housing.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Take care, folks.